In a classroom flooded with the soft light of morning, the familiar sound of shoes scraping against the tiled floor suddenly vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence, as though someone had squeezed the air out of the room. On the front desk, a silver laptop, the very heart of the most important presentation of the semester, had disappeared without a trace. Just 1 second earlier, the class was buzzing with laughter. Now every eye turned sharply toward the half-open door. There stood a black janitor, shoulders slightly hunched, pushing a rattling trash cart past the room. A sharp, urgent cry split the air. He took it. He stole my laptop. No proof, no pause for thought. Just an accusation flung like a torch into a pile of dry hay, igniting a wildfire of suspicion. Students shot to their feet, whispers swelled, fingers pointed, eyes narrowed with hostility. The man froze, his hands trembling on the cart handle, his gaze lost among a sea of young faces demanding instant justice. The air was so thick with tension you could hear the pounding of frightened hearts. And in that charged silence, one chilling question lingered. Is what we see always the truth, or merely the distorted shadow of prejudice we've been carrying all along? The high school stood quietly in the middle of an American suburb, where tree-lined streets shifted colors with the seasons, burning red in autumn, blanketed white whenever snow fell. Outside the classrooms, yellow buses rumbled slowly, delivering groups of students into what was supposed to be a safe world, where knowledge was the ticket to a better life. Yet behind those neat red brick walls, invisible distances divided people. Children of wealthy families showed up with crisp clothes, shiny sneakers, and the latest laptops. At the far end of the hallway, the black janitor, Mr. John, existed like a shadow. Each morning before the sunlight touched the windows, he was already there with his broom, his trash bin, and his worn-out gloves. To the students, he was nothing more than the cleaner. No one asked where he came from, how he lived, or why his weathered face always carried that quiet sorrow. All they knew was that for 15 years, every dirty mark on the floor, every broken light, every squeaky door had passed silently through his hands. He was present everywhere, yet never truly seen. Close enough to exist, distant enough to be forgotten. Mr. John's life unfolded within those endless hallways, where the shrill ring of the school bell marked not opportunity, but a reminder to sweep the classrooms before children rushed out. After work, he returned to a shabby apartment in the outskirts of town, where flickering streetlights cast shaky shadows over him, and his only son, a boy still full of dreams, though college tuition loomed like a storm cloud. His janitor's wage could never cover it, so he took on extra work repairing discarded electronics, salvaged from what students had thrown away. Those scraps filled his tool bag. Screws, wires, and broken boards he patiently pieced together, hoping one day to prove to his son, even in poverty, we can rebuild a future from what others abandon. Yet society was merciless. It never noticed his sweat or his sacrifice, it only saw his skin color, his roughened hands, and the squeaky trash cart. This paradox defined his existence, part of the school, yet always standing outside it. And in such a fragile position, a single small mishap could transform him instantly into the center of blame. Mr. John, the school's black janitor, was a man of few words, so quiet that his silence often made students feel uneasy, even distant. Yet behind that seemingly gruff exterior hid a gentleness no one expected. He never raised his voice. Instead, he used a stern glance to remind children not to run in the halls. And still, when someone dropped their books, he was the one bending down to pick them up, returning them quietly to the desk without a trace of reproach. Each morning before the lights were switched on, he wiped the chalkboard clean, as if determined to hand over a fresh start to the class. In the pocket of his faded jacket, he kept a worn family photo, his constant reminder of why he worked so tirelessly. His personality was full of contradictions, outwardly tired, hunched from years of labor, yet inwardly steadfast, like an old tree that refused to topple in the storm. Perhaps the one thing he never let go of was his belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple forward into the lives of the next generation. In stark contrast stood Alex, the student who lost the laptop. Born into comfort, Alex had been raised in privilege, gifted his own car, armed with the newest phone, dressed in style that spoke of a family that never had to count pennies. He was bright and quick-witted, admired for his intelligence, yet his temper was his flaw, especially when his own interests were at stake. To Alex, the world was neatly divided. Peers from his circle were trustworthy, while those from lower stations, like the janitor, existed outside the borders of respect. Outwardly, he was confident, decisive, even admired by classmates for standing up for himself. But inside, Alex had never learned how to temper anger, never truly understood the lives of people different from him. That blindness made him both admired and dangerous, the first to speak up but also the first to accuse, clinging to whatever his eyes assumed as truth. His impatience and certainty in his own perspective would ignite the firestorm of blame that engulfed the classroom. Between these two extremes stood Ms. Mary, the homeroom teacher, the bridge connecting both worlds. A woman in her 40s, tall, with neatly tied blonde hair and eyes that radiated both strength and compassion. Unlike most students and colleagues who barely noticed John beyond his uniform, she always paused to thank him, asking how his day was, acknowledging his role in keeping the classrooms alive. She believed that every person carried a story, and if one only listened long enough, the truth would reveal itself. With her students, she was strict yet fair, never quick to judge without evidence. And in this crisis, she refused to follow the mob or wield authority as a hammer. Her character shone brightest in chaos. She was the only steady voice amid the storm of accusations. And it would be Ms. Mary who, in the crucial moment, posed the simplest question, the one capable of flipping the entire story on its head. Have we really asked enough to understand? The classroom, once buzzing with chatter, fell into a deathly silence. The missing laptop had vanished as if it had evaporated before their very eyes, sending Alex's heartbeat racing. He shot to his feet, pointing toward the hallway where Mr. John had just passed by. It was him. I saw him near my desk. Alex's voice cracked like a gavel slamming down. Heads whipped around, eyes locking on the hunched figure pushing his squeaky cart. Whispers spread like wildfire. It has to be him. Who else could it be? The air stretched tight as a violin string, ready to snap with the slightest tug. In that single instant, suspicion, without evidence, without pause, was planted like a thorn in the minds of everyone present. Mr. John froze. His calloused hands gripped the cart handle, trembling. His eyes flickered with surprise but quickly dimmed, as if he were no stranger to suspicion. The room swelled with whispers that rose into a tide of noise. A few students stood up to echo Alex. I saw it too, he's always hanging around here. Their flimsy words, without proof, poured gasoline on an already sparking fire. John opened his mouth, but his throat was parched, his explanation strangled by the roar of young voices. In their eyes, he was no longer the quiet man who fixed their lights or scrubbed their floors. He was simply the suspect, standing in an invisible courtroom. Alex slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp crack slicing through the air. That's my laptop, the most important presentation of the semester. If he took it, I'll fail this class. The accusation twisted into a threat, pulling the entire class toward fury. A few girls gasped, clutching their bags and whispering about calling the police. Red-faced classmates leaned forward, eyes blazing, forming an invisible wall around Mr. John. He bowed his head, veins straining on his clenched hands, but said nothing. His silence, meant as dignity, only looked like guilt. The chorus of voices swelled, overlapping into a storm of judgment. Amid the chaos, Ms. Mary entered, her expression stern, eyes sweeping across the room. Calm down. Who gave you the right to pass judgment without evidence? She demanded, her voice steady, yet drowned beneath the tide of suspicion. A student shouted back, But who else could it be, Ms. Mary? He's always lurking here. The flimsy accusation, hollow as it was, gained traction, embraced by the mob as truth. Ms. Mary inhaled deeply, sensing how fragile truth had become in the grip of group emotion. She stood tall, but dozens of eyes still burned holes into John, the verdict already written across their faces. John lifted his head, eyes heavy with sorrow as he faced the accusing stares. His voice rasped, cracked with fatigue. I didn't take it. I was just passing by. But the words, fragile as a drop of water, vanished in a sea of fire. Alex sneered, his voice sharp. If you didn't, then show us what's in your bag. The challenge lit the fuse. Students chanted, chairs screeched across the floor, shoes stomped in unison. John stood still, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. He didn't want to open his bag, not out of fear, but from humiliation tightening around his chest. His trembling hands betrayed his pain, his eyes holding the silent wound of being branded a thief, not for what he'd done, but for who he was. A tall boy shouted, "If he's innocent, why hesitate? Honest men have nothing to hide." The words slammed down like a hammer, pushing the mob to the brink. John inhaled, ready to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the chant. "Open it! Show us!" Ms. Mary raised her hands, desperate to calm them, but reason had already been devoured. The weak were cornered, and John was the weakest of all. Pressed against the wall, his eyes darted, his feet shuffled back like a man herded into a dead end. In his vision, the world shrank to dozens of hostile eyes, sharp, unrelenting, leaving no space for truth. The chant thundered on as Alex snarled, "If you don't open it, I'll call the cops right now." Silence fell for just a few seconds, heavy as stone. Some students already had their phones out, eager to record evidence for social media. They weren't seeking truth, they wanted a spectacle. John exhaled sharply, lips trembling, but before he could speak, another student cut in. "Why defend him, Ms. Mary? He's obviously the most suspicious one here." Ms. Mary's heart pounded. She knew if this didn't stop, within minutes flashing red and blue lights would arrive, and then nothing could undo the damage. John sank onto a chair, burying his face in his hands. Under the dim classroom light, the deep lines on his forehead looked like scars carved by years of rejection. Memories flooded back, being denied jobs for his skin, stopped by store security despite empty hands. He had swallowed that humiliation before, but now, with dozens of young eyes watching, he couldn't bear it. Whispers stabbed at him. "Look at him, he's scared, guilty for sure." His silence warped into confession in their minds. Drowning in their voices, John felt himself sinking into the swamp of prejudice, with no lifeline in sight. Ms. Mary stepped closer, resting a firm hand on John's shoulder. "Enough. If any of you saw him take it, show me proof right now," she declared. Her words dropped like an anchor, yet instead of calming, they stirred the crowd again. "No one saw it, but who else could it be?" A student snapped. Another piled on. "He's always around at the wrong time. That asked proof enough." Flimsy logic, but in the frenzy it cut like a blade. Alex clenched his jaw, voice trembling with rage. "I won't let him get away." Every word, every glare, turned into arrows aimed at John, the unwilling center of their fury. And then, John raised his tear-streaked eyes, gaze firm despite the quiver in his voice. "Why, won't you ask me just one question?" His words were barely above a whisper, but they hit like a crack of thunder, stilling the room. Ms. Mary's chest tightened. Alex froze mid-breath, but the crowd wasn't ready to relent. Voices rose again. Demands collided with his silence. The tension peaked. On one side, their shouts for proof. On the other, the quiet dignity of a man refusing to dismantle his pride. The clash reached a breaking point, and in that unbearable moment, something was about to snap. A twist waiting to turn the story upside down. The chants pressed in on him. "Open it! Open it now!" Forcing John to the edge. Slowly, his rough hands reached for the strap of his worn canvas bag. Every eye followed, breaths caught, waiting for the damning reveal. He inhaled deeply, shoulders trembling as if he were about to surrender. But when he pulled it open, out spilled not a laptop, but a battered toolbox. A rusty pair of pliers, a screwdriver worn smooth, shattered circuit boards, and crumpled sheets of diagrams. The classroom froze. The silence this time wasn't fury, but shock. What they expected to be proof of guilt was instead evidence of something entirely different, something no one had bothered to imagine. Alex's voice cracked, caught between anger and confusion. "Then, what are those? Why hide this junk?" Ms. Mary stepped closer, peering at the contents. They weren't stolen goods. They were fragments of another life. Salvaged electronics, tools of repair. John's gaze lifted, his words slow but steady. I collect these to teach my son how to rebuild from what others throw away. He wants to go to college, but we can't afford it. I don't want him to believe poverty means helplessness." His voice trembled, yet carried a weight that echoed through the room. For the first time, some students saw him not as a suspect, but as a father. Desperate, resourceful, quietly resilient. The room buzzed with new whispers, but softer now. Confused, unsettled. One student muttered, "So, it wasn't the laptop? But he still could have hidden it." Alex seized the thread clinging to his narrative. "Don't let him trick us. He could have stashed it somewhere else." But Ms. Mary's voice cut through. "And where's your proof, Alex? Where's the evidence?" Alex faltered, sweat beading on his forehead. John didn't lash out. Instead, he simply shook his head. His silence was no longer submission. It was dignity. He wouldn't rip apart his pride to beg for belief. The imbalance of power shifted and the mob's certainty began to crack. Suddenly, the classroom door creaked open. The security guard stepped in holding something familiar, a silver laptop. "Whose is this?" "Someone left it in the security office." Gasps rippled through the room. Alex's face drained of color, his hands tightening into fists. The laptop hadn't been stolen at all. It had been safe the whole time. In an instant, every accusation, every chant collapsed into dust. The truth wasn't just John S. innocence. It was the revelation of how quickly they had turned him into a criminal simply for being there, at the wrong time, wearing the wrong face in their eyes. Relief didn't sweep the room. Instead, shame poured in like a flood. Students who had shouted the loudest now stared at the floor. Alex clutched the laptop the guard handed him, but his hands shook, his throat dry. He glanced at John, eyes darting, lips parting as if to speak, yet nothing came out. John didn't gloat, didn't scold. He simply tightened his grip on the toolbox, his gaze weary, but within it shimmered something unexpected. Forgiveness. That quiet grace was heavier than any lecture. It stripped away Alex's pride, leaving him small, exposed. A boy who had mistaken anger for justice. A girl finally broke the silence. If the laptop was in the office, why was Mr. John here? John raised his head, his voice slow but unwavering. It fell under the desk. I was afraid someone might step on it, so I put it in the security office. Then I came back to clean. But I never thought anyone would suspect me like this. His words landed heavy, like stones on fragile glass. They realized the truth had been there all along, waiting for a single honest question. Instead, their rush to judgment had turned an act of care into a mark of guilt. Alex stumbled back, his chair screeching against the floor. He searched the room for allies, but found none. Those who once roared with him now lowered their eyes. Silence pressed down, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan. Ms. Mary's voice rang firm. "This is why we don't judge without proof. Just one question, Alex. If you had asked one question, everything would be different." Alex bit his lip, eyes burning. He wanted to argue, but his own conscience silenced him. The weight of his mistake bore down, heavier than any punishment she could assign. John crouched to gather his scattered tools. Each screw, each broken board, clinked softly into the bag. But to the students, the sound was thunderous. Every piece was proof that he was a builder, not a thief, a man remaking value from scraps. A boy blurted out, "We're sorry." The words trembled, awkward, but unlocked others. Heads nodded, eyes brimmed, murmurs of regret filled the air. John gave only a faint nod, his smile weary, forgiving. He didn't demand apologies. The lesson was already etched deep. They understood now. Their mistake had inflicted a wound, but also carved a truth they would never forget. The room hung heavy, not with rage, but with guilt. Alex stepped forward, clutching his laptop to his chest, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry. I was wrong." His voice cracked, breaking through his own pride. The apology wasn't just for John. It was for himself, for letting anger blind him. Miss Mary's eyes softened, her nod an acknowledgement. She placed a hand on John's shoulder, sealing the moment. Roles had shifted. The accused was now the respected, and the accuser had become the student of humility. The reversal was complete, and the lesson undeniable.
Then Miss Mary's voice rose, final and resonant. Remember this: truth is often simpler than we think. All it takes is one question, one pause to listen, instead of a dozen accusations. Her words echoed, sinking into every heart. John turned, pushing his squeaky cart toward the hallway, but this time the eyes that followed him weren't sharp with suspicion, they were heavy with respect. The twist was no longer just about clearing his name. It was about unmasking their own haste, their prejudice, their blindness. The true thief wasn't John. It was judgment itself.
The classroom now sat under a suffocating weight. Apologies had been whispered, but they could not erase the sting of humiliation John had endured. He remained seated, clutching his battered toolbox, his gaze distant, as though he were staring into years of silent endurance. Everyone seemed to wait for something, one last release, a closing act that would untangle the tension. Ms. Mary stood at the center between two worlds, students trembling under guilt and the man they had nearly destroyed with their accusations. The storm had passed, yet the silence afterward was even heavier, like the air after thunder has cracked the sky, leaving only the echo of its destruction. Alex tightened his grip on the laptop, dragging his feet toward John. The class watched, breathless, as if every step carried the weight of confession. His lips quivered. I was wrong. His voice trembled, stripped of arrogance, fragile like a child who had finally lost his way. John lifted his eyes, meeting the boy's gaze. No anger there, no bitterness. Just a calm stillness, unsettling in its grace. He didn't answer, letting Alex wrestle with his shame. And then, when Alex's knees buckled and he sank to the floor, clutching the laptop like a shield of broken pride, the room broke into a silence so loud it roared in their ears. Everyone knew. The boy had finally understood. John's roughened hand reached out, resting on Alex's trembling shoulder. The touch was light, but it reverberated like a bell across the classroom. His voice cracked, raspy but resonant. I don't need your apology to forgive you. What I need is for you to learn. See the truth before you judge. Each word hung in the air, ringing in their hearts. Alex broke down, tears pattering onto the floor like stones striking water. The confrontation had dissolved, not in anger, but in something more powerful: mercy. And in that moment, John transformed. Not a janitor, not a suspect, but a teacher, imparting the hardest lesson of all. One by one, the students rose from their seats. Applause trickled at first, hesitant and uncertain, then grew stronger, swelling like rain on a tin roof. It wasn't applause of celebration, it was acknowledgement, contrition, a collective act of penance. John looked around, eyes glistening, unable to speak. The sound didn't inflate his pride. It lifted a burden, releasing years of being unseen. For the first time, he wasn't just the cleaner. He was a man, a presence, someone whose dignity had been recognized. In that wave of clapping hands, the classroom shifted, transformed from a place of accusation into a sanctuary of awakening. Miss Mary stepped forward, her voice deep and unwavering. What you've just lived through is a lesson greater than any exam. A single false accusation can shatter a life, but a single honest question can save one. Her words rolled across the room like thunder. Students bowed their heads, some bit their lips, others wiped their eyes. The truth was stark and painful. They had nearly destroyed a man because of haste. And in that acknowledgement, they felt the sting of their own cruelty. They realized judgment isn't merely a mistake. It's a wound that leaves scars long after the moment has passed. The security guard, still standing by the door, added his own truth. It was John who brought the laptop to the office. I saw him myself. If not for him, it might have been lost for good. His words sealed the case, driving away the last shadows of doubt. Students turned toward John, their stares transformed. No longer sharp, no longer cold, but filled with reluctant admiration. A few shuffled forward, blurting apologies. John only smiled faintly, weary but forgiving. He didn't crave their remorse. What mattered was the lesson, and now the burden of carrying it belonged to them. Alex inhaled sharply, then placed his laptop on the teacher's desk. "This presentation doesn't matter as much as what I've learned today," he confessed, his voice breaking but resolute. Eyes turned toward him, faces once complicit, now softened. They saw the shift, not arrogance, not pride, but humility taking root. Alex had been the one to ignite the storm. Now he bore the heaviest weight of atonement. Yet by standing up and admitting fault, he offered the others a path forward. Courage, they realized, wasn't in shouting the loudest accusation. It was in facing the truth when it cut the deepest. John slowly rose to his feet. Straightening his frayed jacket, he gripped the handle of his cart. But before leaving, he turned back, his voice gravelly yet firm. "Never let another person go through what I just did, simply because you refused to ask a question." The classroom stilled, every word sinking like an engraving into their hearts. He turned away, pushing his squeaky cart down the hall. The rattling wheels echoed like a funeral drumbeat, marking the death of their arrogance. And in that slow, deliberate exit, they understood. His departure was not the end. It was the beginning of a lesson that would follow them long after. As his shadow faded from view, Ms. Mary drew a deep breath. "You lost the chance to truly see him before suspicion blinded you, but the chance to change yourselves remains." Her words lit a flame within the silence. Students exchanged glances, no longer evasive but resolute. Pens scratched hurriedly across notebooks, not class notes, but the raw truth etched into their souls. They wanted to remember. They needed to. Because the cost of forgetting was too great. The dignity of a man nearly destroyed by their carelessness. The bell rang, its familiar chime now transformed into a tolling bell of reckoning. Chairs scraped softly as students packed their bags, but there was no chatter, no laughter. Alex lingered until the very end, clutching his laptop yet staring at nothing, burdened by the weight of what had transpired. At the window, Miss Mary watched the curtains sway in the breeze, her heart heavy but hopeful. Change was possible. She believed it because today her students had touched the edge of injustice itself. And only by brushing against that edge could they learn to cherish the fragile, precious weight of fairness. In life, what breaks a person isn't always hardship or poverty. It is the weight of an unjust gaze, the sting of unfounded judgment. The classroom story ended with the laptop returned and the truth restored, yet the echoes remain. A single pointed finger, a careless accusation, can crush someone's dignity beyond repair. And yet, just as powerfully, a single question, an honest moment of listening, can save a life from ruin. This lesson isn't confined to those students. It belongs to all of us. How often do we rush to conclusions, letting fear, prejudice, or anger dictate our truth? How often do we forget to pause and simply ask, is it really as I think? For sometimes that question opens a door to an entirely different reality, one of kindness, one of understanding. And sometimes, that single pause doesn't just protect another person as humanity. It rescues us from becoming accomplices to injustice. Mr. John's story may have closed within those school walls, but its message lingers, etched deep. Never be quick to judge. Always ask one more question.